Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar. We are so excited to have you here. While folks come in, Delaney will be launching a fun poll to test your bee knowledge. This could happen just in a moment while we wait for some stragglers. Oh, here's the poll. All right, Delaney, take it away. I love this. Welcome.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. While we let everybody trickle on in, we have launched a poll. We are testing people's bee knowledge, bee trivia today. We have a really diverse audience of bee expertise joining today, all levels of beekeepers and bee enthusiasts and pollinator supporters. So as you come in, as we wait for folks to trickle in, test your bee knowledge. I will be making Noah and Max provide answers to these when we close out the poll. Just for some opening toolkit items, you're welcome to use the chat. Tell us where you're calling in from today, where you're joining in from today, why you love bees, and the Q&A tool in the Zoom webinar will be reserved for you to drop in your questions that you would like answered by Noah and Max at the end of the webinar. We're going to work to reserve at least 15 minutes for just Q&A from the audience. So chat is for just dialogue. Tell us where you're coming in from today. And that Q&A is for questions you would like answered during the question and answer portion of the webinar today. So come on in, answer some questions. We have some chats coming in. We have Mrs. Sandy's class from Michigan.
Michigan in the house. I love this. West Virginia, Denver. Oh man, all over the place. Puerto Rico.
Wow. Georgia.
Bees in the D. Hey, Bri.
South Carolina.
Wow.
Prague, Europe, Florida. Wow. Kenya. That is cool.
Oslo. Wow. Guadalajara. Woo. Okay, as y'all are tuning in here, don't forget about the poll. I've got 3 questions. I've got to say, these questions are pretty tough. Delaney's going to put Max and I on the spot here. Even though we practiced, I still sometimes wonder, did I get it right? And I will say in our first practice, I did not get these right. So it's great. Anytime we can learn together, that's what this is all about. Wow.
Awesome. And we'll give everyone another minute or two to come in. So feel free, again, chat, tell us where you're coming in from. Q&A as people are coming in. If you're coming in and you already have a question that you know you would like Max or Noah to answer at the end of the webinar, use the Q&A tool of Zoom, and I will make sure I'll be monitoring that and making sure we get questions answered. So Q&A tool for your questions you would like answered, chat for chat and conversation, and yeah, test your knowledge with our opening poll.
Let's go. There are some trick questions in there.
Max and Noah?
Super excited about getting started.
All right, well, let's close this poll out. We're a couple minutes in, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and let's see how everyone did. I'll share the results so you guys can see it. So our first question, what can bees carry more of? Max, I'm going to make you answer this question. What is it, nectar or pollen?
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's actually nectar. So they collect up to twice as much nectar than pollen. And for the ones who want to get really specific, it's up to 30 milligrams per flight. And there's up to 100 flowers that are required to get to those 30 milligrams, or up to 15 milligrams in pollen. So it's about 2-to-1 ratio there.
I got it wrong also.
A bee scientist also got it wrong. So that's a tricky one. And question number 2, what famous alcoholic beverage is made with honey in Ethiopia? Max, I'll have you answer this one too.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with the answers actually, because this is one of the trick questions. We're all more so in the West familiar with mead. So I see that that's the one that won, it's 53%, but it's actually tej. And I'm very impressed that 40% of the people know about tej. So that's a staple in most Ethiopian households. And the bee production or the honey production there is very closely tied to tej production. And that's the beverage of choice. And if you haven't had it yet, try an Ethiopian place nearby. It's very sweet. And so are the hangovers.
I hope our attendees from Africa got this one right. And in the future, when we can all do this together, our after party will have some tej.
There you go. Awesome.
It's a good goal. Awesome. And the final question I will pose to Noah. What is the furthest that a bee can travel from their hive?
This one was pretty evenly split, at least across the first three options. So 3 to 5 miles is a common estimate for how far bees can fly, certainly a bit further when there are resources that aren't available nearby. But 14 kilometers is the answer, 8.6 miles. I will tell you that I know a professor at Wellesley College in Massachusetts named Heather Matilla. I call her the bee whisperer, not to her face, but I would. Maybe she's attending today. Hi, Heather. And she can watch a bee's waggle dance that tells other bees where to go, and then she goes to the flowers, and she says that she has heard a bee tell her, dance to her, that they can go over 40 kilometers plus, way farther than that, which is amazing. So bees are really going quite far, and they're dancing to tell the other nestmates, to tell her sisters where to go. Super cool.
We should be doing the same. We should dance and tell where each other to go. That would be awesome.
Should we do a waggle dance now, Max? Maybe that's another webinar. Shake your booty. You know, I love that.
All right. Well, thank you everyone who took the poll. That was really fun. Thank you, Max and Noah, for sharing those answers. I'm going to stop sharing the poll. And Max and Noah, if you guys are ready to dig into data, a tool for global change, let's get into it.
Awesome. All right. So my name is Noah Wilson Rich. I am the CEO and Chief Scientific Officer at the Best Bees Company. I co-founded Best Bees with my best friend Cahill back in 2010 with the goal of leveraging our client beehives at home gardens, business rooftops, even government campuses, all to fuel my scientific research. I now lead the science team with analyzing the data that we collect from beehives and aiming to understand what data are telling us about bee health and how we can improve the health of really all bee and pollinator species around the globe.
Awesome. Thank you, Noah. My name is Max Rinsel. I'm the CEO of HiveTracks. I have a background in food and resource economics and rural development, which I studied in Belgium, Germany, and South Korea. And right before joining HiveTracks, I was working for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome, Italy. And I was working in extension, where it was all about developing technologies and practices for smallholder beekeepers around the world to better and improve their practices. And that's where I found out that there has to be a smarter way to do this, and how we could use technology and data to empower beekeepers with the knowledge that they need when they need it. And I believe that we can craft technology and data that works for us as human beings and not against us. So that's why I'm so excited about being here today. Over to you, Noah.
Yeah, I love that. And so this webinar today is all about this concept of easy access and ways that data and science can improve the human condition around the globe for everybody, and not just even for humans, but for pollinators and for plants and for our whole agriculture and ecological community out there. So for Best Bees, what we do is beekeeping. We install and we fully manage honeybee hives, and we use software that we write the code for in-house, and we call it Buzz. We like to have fun with it. The software then helps our beekeepers report data back from all of our beehives in a way that connects all of the beehives in a network. And it's kind of an innovation platform. So now that we have all of these beehives connected across the United States, we're able then to think about where the bees are doing well, where they're not doing well. And then we can do a lot with the information because it's connected at scale. And so we can produce things for companies like corporate sustainability reports that have a lot of data in them. We can also do keynote events or talks and webinars like this that help to build community around data by gathering people together for discussions. Of course, we advance actual research with publications that share our results. And we think a lot about this term called greenwashing. Whenever people or companies or governments do things that they say are very good for the environment, but when they're not connected with data or research, they're kind of missing the point. And that's called greenwashing. They do it just for good PR. And so here today, we're sharing this concept with you called anti-greenwashing. And that's really the vision for our company. It's part of a global movement called From Gray to Green, where we're reimagining spaces that are not used, such as empty rooftops, and we're turning them into assets or things of value by making them green, whether that's with pollinator habitat or community gardens or any functional space, especially when it's connected to research. That's what we're all about.
Thank you, Noah. Yeah, at HiveTracks, we crowdsource biodiversity data collection by empowering beekeepers with technology. So our mobile app and web-based products are used by individuals, smallholder beekeepers, all the way up to government level organizations. And since 2010, we've tracked over 200,000 hives and used the data to impact global food security, bee health, beekeeper livelihoods, and now also to incentivize biodiversity protection. And this combination between community, data, and bees is what brought us together here under a shared mission. And today we work towards democratizing technology and data collection. And it's not just democratizing technology and data collection, but it's the access to it, right? In an ideal world, technology and data disappears in the background, becomes seamless to make it accessible to beekeepers everywhere. And that's what Best Bees and HiveTracks is all about.
I love that. So for today's webinar, this is actually my favorite slide. Here's an overview. Now, Max and I got together with our teams and we wanted to really boil it down to just 2 projects each to highlight. Even though we're doing many things, a lot at scale, Max and I have had a lot of conversations and planning this. It's been really fun to learn what HiveTracks is doing. And so for us, we wanted to just pick 2 each. So here's what we're going to talk about today, 4 projects total. Max is going to start with HiveTracks and how they're working with data-proven honey origins that relate to beekeepers around the world, empowering them through technology to tell their stories, to share with people where the honey's from, how it's made, who the people are, and what the environment is. It's an amazing way that technology is really helping to lift up beekeepers around the world and help connect consumers with what's happening on the ground. Next, we're going to do a deeper dive into honey that really helps to leverage all of the stories that Max is going to share with us with data from DNA that we collect about plants within honey. And we call that honey DNA. And we share that with our nonprofit's website. We call that the Urban Bee Lab, or UBL for short. That's about advancing biodiversity through advanced technology at the molecular biology level. Then we're really going to share how HiveTracks technology has helped support women beekeepers in Ethiopia as an amazing case study. And this is really important for me, I think, as well as for Max and so many others who are looking around the globe and trying to best understand pollinator health, which is something that impacts all of us. Anybody who eats food needs bees and pollinators. And the way that we can really connect and understand what's happening is through this technology. So I'm really excited to have Max share that story with you. Lastly, we are going to blast it up into space and draw connections across networks. So we'll have shared with you by then how the network of beehives and the network of beekeepers are all advancing our mission to improve bee health. But I want to share with you a bigger, much more macro level for how the information that we get from that network of bee health applies to our understanding from other more complicated networks. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's get started.
Thank you, Noah. Awesome. Yeah, we believe in a world where I only want to consume things where I know the story about it, right? The food I produce, where does it come from? Who has produced it? Anything I consume, really. So we started to wonder about how do we do that with honey? How can we prove the origin of honey with bee data? And the goal of our project is to enable product differentiation in a very simple way. So how can we tell the story, craft the story of the season, the story of the health of your hive, by simply recording what beekeepers do on a daily basis? So what a beekeeper does, the interactions, the human biodiversity interactions of a beekeeper with a hive, crafts a story. And if we capture that story with hive visits, with hive locations, with flora and fauna, with the foraging radius that bees do, and we visualize it and we make it accessible to consumers through a QR code or an NFC, there's a couple of interesting things that happened in our testing. So we found that providing a proof of origin allows for the better storytelling. It allows to build an emotional bond with the people I buy my honey from. I know where I get my honey from. I know where it comes from. I know how the bees were kept, what family, what beekeeper is behind it. And at the same time, by visualizing the journey, the story, crafting the story of the season, I can also measure the environmental impact and get that visualized. And this validation and transparency in the value chain has not just shortened it to make it easier to access the origin of the honey, if you will, but also to improve hive health, beekeeper livelihoods, and biodiversity, because all of a sudden consumers can choose the type of honey that is congruent with the values that they believe in. And if you want to take a closer look at this, Delaney is going to throw a link in the chat to see what our proof of concept looks like. So this is the very first profile that we've created that gives you an idea. And you'll be hearing a lot more about this later this year when we will start launching it.
I love this. There's so much information here. I am wondering more if you can share about the data points that you capture. I wonder if there are any hypotheses that you test that can advance science and research. You know, for me as a scientist, I love that topic. Or if the project is a little bit more about connecting people with their stories rather than just the data. I think they're both really valuable in different ways.
No, that's a really great question, and we believe in both, right? We believe that there has to be an emotional connection. There has to be a story behind it, because we are humans and we need stories. But can we underpin it with data, right? So can we take data that backs the story, that backs up the emotional connection? And that's what we're working toward. And data points we collect, it is blooming data that we are collecting, that we are crowdsourcing. It's weather data that we're pulling in. It's any type of practices that beekeepers record in the app. We have lots of recommendations in the app that spill back certain information that they had to get to. So trying to find the balance again, make it easy to enter data, visualize it in an easy way, and underpin the human connection that we have with honey. You always say it's the taste of the land. No, I like that expression. To underpin that with the relevant data, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, I love that too. And when I was in graduate school, there was a lab that studied ethnobotany, and I had never heard of that term before, but you know, ethno thinking about people, and botany is the connection to plants. And especially for fieldwork around the world, you know, like us, a couple of white guys coming in around the world, and it's like, you know, we need to just listen, learn, observe before we can do anything else, like participate. So I see a question in the chat. I want to pose it to you from Pat Bono. It's a really fun one. How do you prove origin without pollen analysis? Is that, do you take an ethnobotanical approach and really talk to people and understand what they know about their own land that's in bloom, or are there other approaches that you consider there?
Yeah, so we have more of a metadata approach, right? So we see the interactions between the hive and the beekeeper as the first step, right? You're going to be talking more about this. If you want to get to the ethnobotanical level, of course, you have to have the pollen analysis to really give a DNA analysis, if you will, of the pollen. But we've seen that a lot of the interactions between a beekeeper and the hive can tell a very good story about the origin of the honey, specifically the apiary, and also the type of floral resources around it that we are crowdsourcing and verifying by beekeepers in the area that are communicating it. So it's a mix, and we believe it's a good starting point. And you said earlier, Noah, about the scientific approach to it. This is more of a crowdsourcing of the data approach, so we know that we can't get to the same level of like exactness that science tries to do with the protocol, but it's like, can we get it started and underpin it with the data that makes it easy to collect, to then supplement it with scientific analyses that you'll be talking about in a minute.
Yes, I love this. So for our project, when we're starting to advance on these topics in a very complementary way by adding molecular biology, it helps inform beekeeping practices through science. And when we're thinking about honey, one of the goals that we have for all 400 plus of you in attendance today is to change your perspective. So when you look at a jar of honey, I want you to not just see honey anymore, but I want for you to see maps or DNA information that's suspended in time, and the only food that really doesn't spoil. So these maps, this information is preserved for thousands of years. Even if we might not eat 1,000-year-old plus honey, the information is still there. And that's what we want to reveal to best understand pollinator foraging habitat. And so when we take a deep dive, we zoom in with our microscope lens into honey, we see plant DNA that's in there. And what we do is share this information for free with the world in a citizen science project. Citizen science, meaning anybody can participate in science by sending in a sample of honey with our honey DNA program. And we look at the plant DNA there. We use a tool called genomics. When we're looking at the genome, it's just like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe for humans, but instead of finding out a person's heritage, we then see this honey is from certain plants. And when you go to our urbanbeelab.org website, that's our nonprofit research charity, and you'll see a map on that website that looks just like this, that you can zoom in and you can start to see as we build out the world's pollinator foraging habitat, the results from what each honey sample contained. And this informs us of some remarkable things. It tells us what we're tasting. And as Max was saying, a taste of your neighborhood. So here in San Francisco, or where we're based in Boston, this is what our neighborhoods taste like. And there's so much rich information there to build community, to build pride, to then take those results and share with the community and say, well, here's the list of pollinator plants. Which ones are relative to our community? Which ones are food producing? Are any of these foods relative to our traditional recipes, so that we can really flourish and take a lot of pride that the things we're planting aren't just good for our communities, but they're also good for pollinator communities. When we support pollinators, they don't only bring us food, but they're also helping to promote other plants that then take in half of the atmospheric carbon that's released by human activity. It's all connected. So we're going to taste our neighborhoods, we're going to understand what we're planting, and we can keep our money local by when we bring that and those lists to our local garden centers. So you can have another connection between economic and ecological sustainability. And by understanding what honey is produced, maybe you can charge a little bit more money when you sell that because you now know the identity of the honey. One great example is Manuka honey out of New Zealand, where it is very, very expensive. If anybody's seen Manuka honey, Manuka is a plant that's produced there. And the government of New Zealand has really supported the honey industry through science to add value that connects ecological and economic sustainability in the most amazing ways. I'm really excited about this also for the scientific impact. Now, one of the things that we look at is food deserts, areas where there really are not enough plants to have bees supported with their good nutrition. This is a project that the US federal government hired the Best Bees Company for last year, and it's ongoing research to understand areas of increased biodiversity, where there's a lack of biodiversity, and then through these honey DNA lists, it informs people what to plant more of. And the people at their own local area can say, these are native, or these are going to do, these milkweeds are going to support monarch butterflies, or these particular squash plants can support squash bees. There's so much information just within a spoonful of honey. One of the projects I'm really proud of has to do with climate and how do we increase our resiliency against the heightened frequency of natural disasters due to climate change. We've done projects in Puerto Rico. I know you're tuning in today with Hurricane Maria, working with local beekeepers to assess honey before and after the storm to see what plants existed and what plants were lost and what plants bounced back. With that study, as well as a study with California's wildfires and local beekeepers submitting honey, and the Best Bees network of beehives submitting honey before and after the wildfires, we saw native plants bouncing back soonest. And those native plant lists help empower local communities with the knowledge of what to plant proactively so that those plants can bounce back soonest and increase our resiliency against these natural disasters.
That is awesome, Noah. And actually, you mentioned Puerto Rico, and you mentioned or showed the whole map. So there is a couple of questions there. So what are the next dots on the map that you're planning to fill in? And I saw a question here too, somebody asking from the EU, how can we participate? How can we send in samples? And is it possible to also do that from the EU?
Yeah, I love these questions. So certainly, I think with anybody tuning in, it's very difficult to be a global citizen without acknowledging your local community. And so you can see on the map, it is very centered in the United States. It's just a function of where we're at, but it's a global scale with local flair is one of my favorite lines. And so this can be everywhere. It's the same program, but the results you get, it's very different. And we've worked with, for example, the Four Seasons hotel chain on their sustainability that they want to do globally, but then the local flavors, the different flavors. So that's been a lot of fun. When we're thinking about everyday people, the whole thing is about global impact. And so we've worked with research partners to help us scale. One of those is with Yale University in Eastern Africa, where I've had the opportunity to do some beekeeping with the Samburu tribe in Northern Kenya. It was an amazing learning experience for me. I've also worked with the World Bank for the countries of Haiti, as well as Benin. And there's so much richness to understand from those local communities and those local flavors too. How can people get involved? You can order honey DNA kits. They're available in some catalogs. I think Delaney might put a link in there. But most importantly, if you can go to the urbanbeelab.org website and you can donate to support this research if anybody is able to, or you can just participate by visiting the website and then collecting the data, trying to use that information yourselves and applying it in whatever way that you can best support pollinator foraging habitat to green your own environments in ways that really make an impact by promoting pollinator populations and by feeding people.
Awesome. No, actually, you mentioned Eastern Africa and local communities, which is a great segue into one of my favorite projects in the HiveTracks universe. Oftentimes when technology is developed or data is being used, it's being developed for people, but not with people. And that's one of the biggest problems. By not being inclusive in processes, we lose the opportunity to involve people who can then actually also be users of technology and engage with data. So this project of ours where we worked together with the German government was all about how can we localize a US-centric or a Western-centric Hive management app, the HiveTracks app, to improve beekeeper livelihoods locally in rural Ethiopia. And the goal there was to not just empower beekeepers, but to make it theirs. Let's build technology together that ensures that beekeepers felt included in the process. And the interesting thing is you have to consider two pieces, right? At first, you start with the local infrastructure. You look into what hives do we have locally, what practices are there, what kind of diseases, what flora resources exist, what language is being spoken. And once these general components are done, you can start building out prototypes. And we went through dozens of one-on-one sessions with women beekeepers to ensure that the design is not just inclusive, but also gender sensitive, that the type of language that we use makes sense to women beekeepers locally. We went through every icon, every shape, because everything we design, we don't know, it's almost assumptive to put something out there without having it tested. So working with women beekeepers throughout an iterative feedback process, we learned something fascinating.
It's so important. When we go and we listen and learn and observe, that's how we can be allies to beekeepers around the world. And it's really key to make sure that we're not coming in to any area, whether it's, my own city in different neighborhoods or a different country, and saying, do this. That doesn't work. That's like a colonization. And that's absolutely not what we're here to do. And as allies for onboarding easy access with technology globally, I think it's really important to take part in the things that you're saying here. And so I wanted to ask you if you've had to adjust any technology to make this work in Ethiopia. From my own experience with Dr. Muli, who's a wonderful bee researcher in Kenya, we were understanding that sometimes in Africa, there are beehives in trees. When I visited beekeepers in Argentina on floodplains, those beehives were on stilts. And there might be dearth periods with no changing seasons or rainy periods. So what have you had to do to adjust the technology to make sure that this really actually works for women beekeepers in Ethiopia?
Yeah, there were a lot of things we had to adapt. If you can, you see on the screen here is one of the screenshots of what the app looked like if it's in Amharic. And in the apiary there too, you can see what, one of the project sites look like. And we did have, of course, there's the hive types, there's the rainy season, there's the flora conditions to it. And of course, all of the classical beekeeping practices that are more common in the West don't work when you use traditional beehives that are in specific locations or far out where the cycles of inspections are different. So the recommendations that in the app should be different. But the real interesting thing that happened when we worked in this iterative process with the beekeepers is all of a sudden they felt empowered. They felt more engaged. They felt more confident in their beekeeping practices. And it's not just that, it's also by working with them and involving them in this process, we were improving digital literacy. Because all of a sudden, after this project, women beekeepers who had never used a smartphone before were taking screenshots, sending around screenshots, discussing beekeeper problems in groups. And at the same time, being inclusive of this, we narrow the gender data gap. Because if people aren't included in digital processes, they can't make use of the opportunities that being connected allows, with all the empowerment and enablement with tools that comes to it. So that's another big project of this, where we really have to make sure involving the people throughout the process, being inclusive throughout the process to develop better products that make sense to users and bring joy and ultimately improve the livelihoods. And if you're more interested in hearing how it went, Delaney is going to put a link in the chat here for our 2021 report. We're just now working on the 22 report with the German government, but there's lots more information about the process that we had with these beekeepers, pictures around how we sit together around a computer trying to explain it, and lots of the social little anecdotes that came out of the process.
That's so much information here. It's a lot to tackle. And even if we left it at that, it would be a lot, but I want to do a little more with this.
What's going on?
So for what we're really working on, it's connecting people and environments at scale. And it's really difficult to do this alone. I'm sure that every one of you tuning in today has felt overwhelmed, has looked at headlines in the news and just thought, I can't do anything about any of this. And to a large degree, it's true, because alone we can't. We're social organisms, just like bees. And so when we think about a beehive, again, changing your perspective, when I look at a beehive, even right over my screen is one of my beehives right here, I don't see a beehive. Just like when I look at honey, I see information. With a beehive, I see a computer and a printer that gives us information. It's what we call a bioindicator, or something that's alive that gives us information of ecosystem health. It's an indicator species, these honeybees. They're telling us how the environment is doing. If only we'd listen. And so we can't do anything alone at scale. It's very, very difficult. Just like with one worker bee, it's very difficult for her to do much. And so what we're doing here in this whole discussion, and even everything that we at Best Bees and even HiveTracks does with honeybees, it's not about honeybees. It's about the larger environments, and it's about the people behind it. It's about these networks. So we humans are social creatures, just like honeybees, and we're looking at systems and how do we best understand the health of a system. And we can look at other systems, like in the middle here, it's a tree, and underneath the soil are fungi or mycorrhizal fungi. These are networks, these are highways, these are information superhighways, how trees can talk to one another through fungi. And even on the right, underwater, when we think about mussels, if any of you like food from the water, you can think about these colonial living organisms like mussels and how they also have communication systems. Now, the things we can learn from these living networks help inform the built environment and other networks that are out there. They're sort of working with the blockchain technology. And for those of you who have heard that keyword, blocks are groups of information that are then connected along a chain in a way that's not centralized, like through Best Bees, or even you're coming to this webinar. It's all centralized here, but in these networks, like you can see, especially with the trees, this information is all scattered all over the place. And it's really tricky to optimize these systems. But what we're doing with the United Nations and the US State Department and Enterprise Neurosystems, which is a really funny name for a group in academia as well as in private industry, is a program called Aim for Climate, which we launched at the COP conference this past fall in Egypt. And we filmed a video showing how bees can inform us of the optimal systems for other complex things like servers, where this webinar is coming through. This is also informing us about satellites, connectivity that's up in space, and informing us of things like submarines and optimal systems that are pretty isolated from everything else. This is also informing us about nuclear fusion reactors. So much complexity exists in systems that can be informed with life. And when we're thinking about beekeepers and bees and all of the systems there, we start to understand not only how they work, but how they can break down. So when we have information from a beehive that says the queen is making a certain sound, and then that could lead to this particular event, and then that could lead to a swarm, or the queen might die, or an action might happen, the system could break down. We see this in server rooms with pops and clicks and other sounds. And so we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to train systems to better understand the complex nature when everything is connected for the optimal use of a larger network. So this is how networks inform other networks, a network of networks. We're building complexity here from the beehive into outer space with these satellite dishes. And it all comes back down to us. to the individuals. And here is the son of one of my colleagues in my bedroom about to film this video for the United Nations. And we'll be doing another presentation there with Aim for Climate at the upcoming conference that will be in Dubai later this year, where the Aim for Climate initiative is looking for other projects to support with a lot of experts to do artificial intelligence and machine learning to train the computers on these sounds, or with these networks like with HiveTracks or with the Best Bees network of beehives to understand symptoms and little things that could happen that could lead to the breakdown of larger systems, and in our case, could lead to hive death. So it all starts with one beekeeper, and it starts with one person. Maybe that's you. Maybe it's a jar of honey connected through our stories and our maps, and that those then connect with other networks, from these colonial mussels and underwater farming to underground mycelial fungal networks that link trees to satellite connectivity and submarines and server rooms that host this very webinar right now. It's all informing one another for how these complex systems or societies can operate, and what warning signs were present all along the way to indicate their failure, from a honeybee hive and the queen piping at a certain frequency to a beep in a server room, performing all of those complex behaviors. And it comes down to one person getting a beehive, becoming a beekeeper, and participating in research from HiveTracks to Honey DNA with UBL and Best Bees. These all link to impact global change. And it's what we all have to look forward to in the next few years to come. All of these technologies that we can be a part of right now, today. And it all starts right here, right now, with each and every one of you. So thank you so much for attending. And now we're going to turn it to the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Noah.
Amazing. Thank you both. This has been so fun to listen in on, and also to see folks' questions and conversations in the chat and Q&A. Now that we are entering this portion, I want to re-encourage everyone to use that Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar to drop in questions. You're welcome to direct them to Noah or Max directly, or post it to the space, and I will moderate and send them out accordingly. If your question is in the chat, it will be easier for me to see in the Q&A. If you just want to copy it over to the Q&A section, I will do my best to catch everyone's questions and get them answered. All right, Max, Noah, you're in the hot seat. You guys ready to answer some questions?
Let's go. I'm ready.
Let's have some fun.
Let's do it. All right. So one of the questions I see coming in is from somebody who is really passionate about data and is a data analyst. How can they maybe get involved more directly with UBL, with Best Bees, with HiveTracks? Noah, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I love that. So with UBL, it's a nonprofit, it's a research charity, and currently Best Bees does everything for it. So that's a way where all the donations go 100% towards the research. And the way that we have a sort of flywheel, as we call it, between Best Bees and UBL, it's called, here's the legal term with the government, a commercial co-venture. Ooh. So Best Bees does beekeeping and collects data. And then at UBL, volunteers from Best Bees are really staffing it. UBL then analyzes the data and reports it. And whatever we're reporting then informs best beekeeping practices, which then allow us to collect more data. And it's really this virtuous cycle. So for anybody interested in participating, I think going to our social media at Best Bees is a great way to understand what we've been doing. We also have a wonderful blog at bestbees.com that Delaney's working with Elsa Scott, who has a great background in journalism, has a lot of fun, and puts a lot of heart into these blogs. We want to do everything we can to communicate the work that we're doing in many different ways, from our 3 TEDx talks to our museum exhibits. We did 2 at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art last year, to our book with Princeton University Press. So anytime somebody wants to get involved, please reach out to us. I think through social media at Best Bees is probably the best way to do it, because so many of our team are monitoring that, and we can help direct you to the right person.
Yeah. Likewise on the HiveTracks side, feel free to reach out. We'll have 2 QR codes here. If you maybe want to show them already, Delaney, there's 2 codes that people can get in contact with the easiest way, both on the Best Bee side or on the HiveTracks side. We actually do have one research publication that is about to come out where we looked at 5 years of beekeeper data. Over 500 people have kept good records of their inspections, and there was lots of conclusions that we could draw. So there's lots of data to play around with, and that's, I think, the important piece. So if you are in data science, definitely reach out, be that through at UBL or at HiveTracks, to see how we can work together. We're part of the bee data standardization group by Epimondia. That's another great way to start to look into all these different players in the bee universe, so to say, how we can standardize the data and make sure that it all gets together. This is what Noah and I talked a lot about. So there's many, many ways how data science, beekeeping, and the data can come together. And please reach out and get engaged. And we always have a research project going on or some other standardization effort that requires lots of talents in the community, and specifically in the data analysis space.
Amazing. Thank you both. I will also add a plug for Best Bees. If you are a beekeeper that's interested in data, Best Bees is hiring across a few different regions in the US right now. So feel free to go to our website. At the bottom of our homepage, there is a button called Jobs, and you're welcome to check out jobs to see if there's ways to get involved as a beekeeper. All of our beekeepers are really citizen scientists, or scientists in many ways, in that they are collecting data at every hive visit and learning from that data. So that plug in. Let's jump to the next question here. So this is from Steve Arnett. I'll pose this one to you, Max. I think this is a great question for you. So it looks like presumably a lot of the data we gather through HiveTracks is based on traditional beekeeping in a Langstroth vertical hive. How have you accounted for non-traditional hives and beekeeping practices within your software?
Yeah, that is actually, we're quite inclusive about the way beekeepers keep. So when you sign up to the app, actually we just launched our new app today, so you can download it right here through accessing it through the QR code. You can choose for yourself what type of hive you want to select, and you can choose for yourself. We have an inspection process that leaves it open to the beekeeper how you want to handle the recommendations, right? So we try to be very open, mindful of the different styles of beekeeping, how beekeeping is carried out depending on your apiary environment, your apiary terrain, the type of hive you use, and what preferences you have. So there's a couple of preset to-dos and a couple of preset to-do records in the app that you can choose to just create the story of your hive, the hive history throughout the season. And whatever the practices are that work best with you and for you is the ones that you can record. And over time, we have lots of recommendations in it. Over time, we seek to customize these recommendations further, that when you choose your beekeeping style and you mark that in the app, you also get recommendations that are in line with your beekeeping philosophy, your beekeeping approach. And here again, this is, as I talked about the Ethiopia project, this is a way where being inclusive is the important piece. So talk to more people and engage with us. If you have these specific thoughts about the way you keep bees, talk to us and we can see how we can accommodate that in the app to make sure, again, we want to every beekeeping way, be it in Ethiopia or in the US or anywhere in the world, to be reflected and be able to use the app well.
Great. Thank you, Max, for that answer. On to our next question from Ruth. Do we have any published research that beekeepers or citizen scientists, pollinator champions can read to better inform their decision-making? And where is that published research accessible to them? Noah, I'll send it to you first.
Sure. Let me make sure I understand the question. So do we have any literature for beekeepers to make better decisions, like
Yes.
best practices?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So there is a lot of information out there. Max, I'm going to open this up to you as well. If anything comes to your mind, in my mind, it's all the books and all the papers I've ever read.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing, again, sign up for our newsletter. We have one big publication that's actually coming out that specifically looked at that. So that specifically looked at what did beekeepers do over 5 years? And we looked at the outcome criteria. The outcome criteria here was winter loss, right? So we looked into and said, okay, what are different hypotheses? How often do you have to inspect a hive to reduce your winter losses, for example? And there was some very interesting findings about the quantity and the frequency of the inspections that you did. So stay tuned. We're just got the acceptance of the paper. We will publish this in the next few months, and then we will be sending it out. And then you can learn from what the data tells us about over 500 people that have kept record of their same hives over 5 years. So there's lots of interesting learnings across regions. So it's not just in one particular region, it's across the 6 big beekeeping regions across the US. So there will be some interesting insights from there. And above all, it will tell us what else we should be focusing on. So, I can't wait to share it with you, Noah, to see if, some of your beekeeping experts to see what can we change in our practices or in the timing as the climate changes too, right? I think we have to always be on our tippy toes a little bit to know, we know what we know about beekeeping in the past, but sometimes since the weather changes, and we know in the US right now, we have the highest temperatures on the East Coast and the lowest temperatures in the North. And this is a challenge for us. So we have to adopt our technologies and practices and how we handle our hives to a changing climate. And that's where these research publications are so relevant.
I love that you focused on the science and the data, Max, because with our conversations on the topic, we have always got to base our conversations on the underlying truth. And that's what being a scientist means to me, somebody who is focused on revealing what is the truth. It doesn't matter what somebody thinks about the truth. That's just what it is in the natural world. So amongst all of the things that were swirling in my mind, I really wanted to even acknowledge some of the things in the chat where one person from New York City was asking about density for honeybee hives and how that might impact native pollinators as well. It's something that is a changing world. So even some of my favorite beekeeping books, like one by Diane Samataro, when I went to bee school 20 years ago, that's a great foundational thing for a book resource for people to read. But as things continue to change and as people learn more in advanced conversations, that's where I'm really proud of our team with Best Bees for staying on top of this with presenting white papers and our TED Talks, even e-books. That's something we've started to do. So these are resources on the Best Bees website that Delaney, I think you've been sharing them here. Yeah, great, in the chat. And those are things that really help advance the conversations as people learn more. They're no longer just saying, well, what's a bee? Why are bees important? I love that. I mean, that was like a very 2000s question. And then people were saying, well, why do we need bees? Bees pollinate our food, right? Oh, well, what does rooftop to table mean and farm to table? And now people say, well, what species of bee? Yes, this is amazing. So we want to, as a collective team, take everybody with us. And that's really where technology comes in and this theme of easy access so that we can all advance these conversations together. So we're no longer just saying like, what's a bee? Why do bees matter? But we're helping to be a part of the modern world. And we're all doing our part in publishing papers. And that's something I'm always here to help inform people. I've published, over 20 research papers on the topic. And so for anybody tuning in today, if you have a perspective, a research question, a hypothesis to test, I'm always available to help advance those publication pathways for you so that everybody can participate.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. And also sharing the pieces we had, there was one UN survey we shared in our newsletter about a week ago that is looking into global practices, right? What do the practices look like in every country? And they're working, it exists in 7 different languages. So we can provide that too with the documents after this webinar to really help. It's the sharing part. There's so many beekeeping experts in different regions. David Tarpey was mentioned here in North Carolina in the chat on one point, and helping combining that. And as you said, Noah, with your research publications, anything we can do to lend a hand, to provide the data, to work with the academic community, to analyze the data and then to feed it back. I mean, that's what this webinar was all about, is like access to it. What sometimes happens with scientific data, it sits somewhere, it sits on a server or an Excel sheet or in a publication that is hard to access. But how do we take that and turn it back into recommendations for beekeepers based on where they are, what grows around them, and the weather and the changing weather events? So I think that's really what we want to focus on, what we have to focus on, is like gathering data, analyzing it, and then feeding it back in a consumable way to make sure it becomes actionable, it improves the way we keep bees all over the US, but also the world.
Great. Thank you both for those wonderful answers. I will answer a quick question myself, if you don't mind. Richard asks if this recording will be available. It will be available to all registrants, attendees, and the public. So it will be added to YouTube and our website. Since Richard, you're here, we already have your email address, and you will receive a recording before the end of the day today to rewatch and take notes. I know we are fast talkers here, so definitely a chance to do a rewatch later today, and you will be receiving the recording via email. So with that being said, I'll jump to the next question. This is from Archie and posed to Noah. What are good resources or activities for folks trying to get young kids, like middle schoolers, engaged and involved with bees and pollinators? What's your advice there?
I love that. There are different ones that come to mind. So one of them I actually just mentioned in the chat. So I helped found a nonprofit called Classroom Hives, classroomhives.org. And this is for schools that allow, it's not everyone, beehives in the classroom as permanent structures. What? I know that sounds so crazy. It's kind of like an ant farm. The bees are behind glass in the classroom. It gives instructions for how to install these. But unlike an ant farm, it is the natural habitat for bees because they come and go through a tube out the window. So there's no bees in the classroom, but it's a great way to allow students to put the textbooks down and engage with learnings from the natural world and get some inspiration. And this is a great way to engage with all different types of learning styles. We've also published a book chapter of curriculum from teachers in the Boston Public School system from K through 12 on how to leverage mathematics, for example, and architecture and engineering and art. So really STEAM, all of these different topics using bees. So one example is tessellations in math. So why is it a hexagon in a beehive? I guess this is my hexagon shape. Rather than a square, circle, or triangle. And by understanding how a shape can lie on a flat plane in the natural world, it engages math with kids in different ways. They can understand the surface area to volume ratio of that shape in a way that creates no negative space. Everything's used. So those are two resources there between Classroom Hives and the book chapter. There's also something that Renee Gervais on our team, who's our lead horticulturist at Best Bees, Renee loves to do. It's a pollinator safari. So put the books down, get the kids outside. It doesn't have to be a big field trip, but take a walk and learn what you see. Teach those kids to engage the observations that they make in everyday lives and notice what they find. Even if you don't know the name of it, the act of noticing is the first step of the scientific method. So it's a science class without kids even having to learn what they're doing. You observe, then they have a question, why is that bee doing that behavior? And then they come up with an idea for an answer. It's the hypothesis. And maybe you can engage the kids then on saying, well, what do we do to test that hypothesis? Let's come up with an experiment. Maybe we can catch one with a net and then do something with it. So there's so many beautiful ways that you can actually engage students to learn and direct their own investigations. So those are just three that come to mind. And it's a great, fun topic. Everybody in my family are teachers, both sides, and my sister. So I love talking about this stuff.
And I think the other aspect to that is also like, where else does bee and honey, where else is honey and bee, relevant? In our newsletter, we always try to do, is there some cultural components, right? What movies do bees, what great honey movies are there, or what great activities, where, is it Winnie the Pooh, or like in what kind of children's stories and in what other aspects does honey play a role? And that's just being outside, but also in just looking, if there are songs, if there are movies, if there's any other materials that people can engage with. And oftentimes we don't realize just how culturally relevant honey is, and just in how many parts of our lives honey always takes a place. So it's both the learning inside the classroom, it's the learning outside in the green, in nature, but then also, of course, all the other aspects of life and looking at it. And next time you go to a farmer's market, or next time you go see a local beekeeper, talking to the beekeeper, where they keep the bees and how the honey is being produced, what flora and fauna they forage on. That's another great way to learn it right there, and to get small children engaged into the topic and ask these questions and start to understand what local honey, the local taste of the land, as you would say, Noah, actually means.
I love that. Two more real quick. Max, you just inspired me to think of one. When you're thinking about honey and kids, edible science is so cool. A science experiment that you can eat. Come on, who doesn't love this? So one of the talks I gave it was at the USA Science and Engineering Festival. It was a kids conference in Washington, D.C., 3,000 kids in the audience. It was a sea. I was intimidated. And what I did was talk about the biology, the chemistry, and physics of honey. And I had stations all around this huge conference room for the kids to understand the science processes in action. So when you look at the texture of honey, when it's very solid or when it's liquid, that's the physics. It's a super saturated solution. When you taste it, the crystals on your tongue, you can understand the chemical process of crystallization and the biology of the honey DNA with the flavors of the land. So that's a really fascinating way to engage. And then also, our work at Best Bees, we work with a lot of schools. Many schools now have these research beehives that are part of our research network. So we can engage with different ways to collect data, even to harvest honey while we're doing other lessons. It all depends on the school and what's appropriate for the local environment.
Awesome. Those were really fun answers, both of you. So thank you. And I'm going to ask kind of a big question. So we'll do our best with our answers, and I've lost the name of the question. Sorry, guys, as I'm scrolling around. But what are the primary reasons that we're seeing in our data for honeybee death, honeybee loss? What kind of summaries or just high level conclusions? I know we could do a whole webinar on this, but I'd love your insights on just what's the data telling you guys around honeybee health, and in as many words as you can. Max, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot of different factors that come into play here, and it's very hard to pinpoint to something in particular. Definitely, it's a change in land use that we see, right, with agriculture sometimes being more input intensive in certain areas. So it's the type of biodiversity that is being reduced in many areas, so there's less to feed for the bees. It's definitely disease pressures that have become more occurring. So it can be, varroa pressures, for example, other diseases that are spreading among certain beehives in particular areas. It can also be lack of knowledge for beekeepers. I mean, beekeeping is it's an intensive activity. So you really have to make sure, what do you do? How do you inspect your hives on a regular basis? What are good practices that are required to keep your hives healthy in a very meaningful way? So again, it's a complex notion of it. It's more adverse climatic events too that have happened. So sometimes now, if you have a very warm, very warm February, if you will, and then all of a sudden you have a frost again, so you may not have enough foraging available for the bees. That today it's a weakness, and it's this breathing of the colony, the living of the colony throughout the season, where the beekeeper has to interact just the right amounts at the right times throughout the season. And since that changes, it's becoming more and more tricky, and it's just becoming more complex, because most of the rules for beekeeping that were true 10, 15 years ago no longer are, because just certain pressures from pathogens are getting higher. And I think those are, I wish there was just one answer. I wish it was to say, just do this and then you're good. So it's really a mix between being more aware of your environment, being more aware of the health of your hive, have a holistic approach to it, and be aware of your own, your own knowledge and your expertise, but also your shortcomings, to update you constantly as a beekeeper, to make sure, talk to your beekeeping club, to beekeeping experts, veterinary experts, state apiary inspector, for example, to keep yourself updated, because it just requires a lot more. There's a lot more fronts that a beekeeper has to tackle at the same time now than, say, 10, 15 or 20 years ago.
And I'll share too, with our Best Bees and UBL collaborative research, we looked at the past 13 years of data with our network of beehives that have informed us where bees are thriving and where they're dying. And we take an approach that we call blue zones. And this is a term coming from human health, areas around the globe where there are many octogenarians, people living past age 80, 90, even 100, places like Japan and the Mediterranean. And that's often associated with a good diet. It's thought of, this Mediterranean diet. So we're taking a page from the humans book and applying it to pollinators on our network of research beehives. And we've identified some of our habitats are blue zones, and some are what we call red zones, below average bee health. And then we asked why. We looked at the 3 leading hypotheses for what's impacting bee health. And that's, as Max was just detailing, so we have agricultural chemicals, that's pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, anything designed to kill life. We have diseases, pests, pathogens, of which there are many, and then habitat loss, not enough flowers to support good pollinator nutrition. And so we looked at all of those, and we wrote up a research paper that we recently submitted for publication from all of our client beehives. Everybody's participated in it, which is really exciting. And it was called What's Killing Our Bees? And long story short, Varroa mite, this mite that came to the United States in 1987, it's worldwide, it's the main killer. And then what's saving our bees? It's good nutrition, healthy habitat, plant flowers, especially ones that are relevant, as we can see from our honey DNA. We have kind of a lead. It might be some mosses that could also be associated with good bee health. So that's what we're looking into. But I always joke, on my grave, it'll say, here lies Noah. It was the mites plant a flower. And this is like nothing that's exciting for any other bee researcher. It doesn't take all the work that we've been doing to necessarily have those conclusions. But what it does take from us, and really from our group of more diverse, younger beekeepers, is this perspective. How do we apply advanced technologies and advanced science and crowdsource from the entire world to power advancing this science? Even though we're confirming things we did already know, the world is changing underneath our feet every single day. And so it's important to continue testing, assessing, and looking at this prospectively while we're onboarding everybody around the world to solve this once and for all.
And there, Jody actually just said it, to plant flowers. That's the other thing, right? And I would add plant native flowers, right? Plant, and then plant more, plant natively. Take native, look what's, what are good floral resources, native floral resources where you live and what you can plant. And that's also one of the pieces in our new app, which is a blooming calendar. So you can look what is currently in bloom where you are locally. And again, if you scan the QR code right there, it's an exciting day in the HiveTracks universe. You can download the new app. And we've also just launched our crowd equity investing campaign. So if you want to support HiveTracks and be part of our growing community of crowdsourcing this data and help improving recommendations for beekeeping around the world and just test them out, please join the Hive, as we were saying right there.
Amazing. And I'll drop in one more link. This was just a recent blog that we update each year, and just recently updated, I believe about a month ago, of our thoughts on why the bees are dying. So that was a great interview with our staff scientist, Emily O'Neill, and has some amazing data points and information in that post as well for those looking to continue learning after this webinar is over. So guys, 12:59. Thank you so much. I'll pass it over to you to kind of close out and give final thoughts. Noah, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, so much for attending. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate that you took some time for the bees, but it's also for ourselves. And it's also to stay connected, not just for our own interest and to feel good, but to make an actual impact. And so I want to invite each of you to sign up for the HiveTracks app here. I want to invite each of you to contact Best Bees to find out if your site is a good location for beehives. Visit bestbees.com, follow us on Instagram or your favorite social media platform for more information about our services, our beekeepers, our data yielding beehives, and our fabulous bees. And you can also sign up for our newsletter. Delaney's going to drop that link in the chat right now.
Thank you so much, Noah. Yeah, big thank you here to you, Noah and Lenny, and everybody on the Best Bees team for hosting us, for having us join you in your webinar. This has been amazing. Join the Hive, engage, buy local honey, plant native flowers, try out our app, have a look if you like it, and engage, talk about it, talk to your friends about it. I think the more people, somebody talked about having a chief pollinator officer in companies. I think that's a phenomenal idea, and we should all be chief pollinator officers and help spreading the word with that. So yeah, please engage, reach out, try out our app, and we look forward to being in touch.
Amazing. And a thank you from me and all of the attendees today to you, Noah and Max, for taking the time to pull together these thoughts, these projects, this research to share with all of us, and continuing to work so hard to democratize and share all of the information that we are both collecting with our team. So thank you both. As we close out, as folks leave, you will be prompted to take a survey. In case you couldn't tell, we are data people. We would love if you could take our survey, tell us how we did, how we can improve. We try and do these webinars at least quarterly, if not every month. So your feedback really helps inform, what we're talking about, how we're doing, how we can improve it for the future. So thank you to all the attendees. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Max. And we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks y'all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Everyone.